The days that followed the revelation were the hardest of Yalara's life. She could not sleep. She could not eat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the images from the holographic display. She saw human ships burning. She saw human soldiers dying. She saw her ancestors being rescued by creatures she had been taught to consider inferior. She spent long hours reading the old records that her mother had discovered. They told stories of incredible courage. Stories of humans who knew they would die but flew into battle anyway. Stories of young men and women who left their homes and families to cross the galaxy and fight for strangers. One story in particular stayed with her. It was about a young soldier named Stephen Moore. He was only 19 years old when he joined the intervention fleet. His parents had begged him to stay home. Earth was far from the swarm, they said. He did not need to fight in a war that was not his own. But Stephen had seen images of the Volanti people being harvested. He had seen children being taken from their parents. And he had decided that he could not stand by and do nothing. "I know I might not come back," he had written in a letter to his family. "But if I stay home and do nothing while innocent people die, I will never be able to live with myself. This is what being human means. We help those who need help, even when it costs us everything." Stephen Moore had died in the final assault on the swarm's main hive ship. He had been wounded during the boarding action, but he had kept fighting until the end. His last words, according to the records, had been spoken to a Volanti soldier he had just saved from a harvester unit. They came from across the stars, not for glory, not for gain, but because they heard our cry for help and could not look away. Those words had been carved into the secret memorial that Empress Thalindra had built. Yalar visited that memorial for the first time a week after learning the truth. She took a small shuttle and flew alone to the distant moon where it orbited. The memorial was beautiful. It was built in the Volanti style, with flowing curves and living crystal, but it included human symbols and writing. Thousands of names were carved into its surface, each one representing a human who had died for her people. Yalara spent hours reading the names. She read the words carved above the entrance. She stood in the cold silence of space and felt the weight of 40,000 years of unpaid debt pressing down on her dot when she returned to the palace. She was a different person. The arrogant princess who had laughed in the throne room was gone. In her place was someone older and wiser and filled with purpose. She called a meeting of the Imperial Military Council, the admirals and generals who led the Volanti war machine, gathered in a great chamber, expecting to discuss routine matters of defense. They were not prepared for what Yalara had to tell them. "Everything we have been taught about the early empire is a lie," she began. "Our ancestors did not drive back the first swarm invasion. They were saved by humans." The room exploded with anger and disbelief. The admirals shouted that this was impossible. The generals demanded to know where she had gotten such ridiculous information. One ancient commander accused her of being under human mind control. Yalara waited for the noise to fade. Then she activated a holographic display and showed them the evidence. She showed them the images of the burning cities and the human fleet arriving to help. She showed them the battle recordings and the casualty reports. She showed them the memorial that her mother had built. By the time she was finished, the room was silent. The admirals and generals stared at the evidence with shocked expressions. Some of them looked sick. Others looked like they wanted to cry. "The swarm is returning," Yalara continued. "They will reach our space within 9 months. We cannot defeat them alone. We need to form an alliance with the humans and any other species willing to fight." "An alliance?" one of the admirals said. "With the very species we have looked down upon for centuries? How can we ask them to help us after how we have treated them? They have already offered to help," Yalara replied. "Ambassador Carter and his delegation are still here. They are waiting for our answer. But why would they help us?" Another general asked. We laughed at them. We mocked them. We insulted their offer of friendship. Yalara thought about Stephen Moore, the 19-year-old who had crossed the galaxy to die for strangers. Because that is who they are, she said. They help those who need help, even those who do not deserve it, even those who have treated them badly. That is what makes them human. The meeting lasted for many more hours. There were arguments and debates and difficult questions. But in the end, the military council agreed to support the alliance. They had no other choice. The evidence was clear and the threat was real. Over the following weeks, the news spread through the empire. At first, there was resistance. Many Volanthi refused to believe that their glorious history was based on a lie. Protests erupted in some cities. Politicians gave angry speeches about human propaganda, but the evidence was too strong to ignore. The old records were released to the public. The secret memorial was open to visitors. And slowly, the attitude of the Volanthi people began to change. Yalara worked harder than she had ever worked before. She met with human officers to learn their tactics and strategies. She studied the technology they had developed to fight the swarm. She visited human ships and talked with human soldiers, trying to understand the culture that had produced such extraordinary courage. She found that humans were not what she had expected. They were not weak, despite their soft bodies. They were not primitive, despite their simple technology. They had a strength that came from somewhere deep inside, a strength that had nothing to do with physical power or advanced weapons. "How do you do it?" she asked Daniel Carter one evening as they reviewed battle plans together. "How do you find the courage to fight against impossible odds?" Daniel smiled. "We do not always feel courageous, Your Highness. We feel scared, just like anyone else. But we have learned something over our long history on Earth." "What is that?" "We have learned that fear is not the opposite of courage. Fear is what makes courage possible. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear, because something matters more than our own safety." Yalara thought about this for a long time. "Your ancestors feared the swarm," she said finally. "They knew they might die. But they came anyway. They came because your people mattered more to them than their own fear. That is what we try to teach our children. That is what we try to remember when times are hard." As the months passed, the alliance grew. Other species, who have been watching the Volanthi with interest, began to offer their own help. The Kolathi, whose living ships could heal from almost any damage. The Sisteri, whose weapons could cut through any shield. The Mendari, whose minds could communicate across any distance. One by one, they joined the alliance. Some came because they feared the swarm. Others came because they were inspired by the story of human sacrifice. And some came simply because they believed it was the right thing to do. Yalara was at the center of it all. She met with representatives from a dozen species. She helped design battle strategies and coordinate fleet movements. She gave speeches that were broadcast across the sector, calling on all peoples to stand together against the coming darkness. And through it all, she carried with her the memory of Stephen Moore, a 19-year-old boy from a small town on Earth, who had crossed the stars to die for strangers. She would not let his sacrifice be in vain. She would prove that his trust in her ancestors had not been misplaced. She would fight, and if necessary, she would die, to protect the galaxy he had given his life to save. The alliance was ready. The fleet was assembled. And the swarm was coming. The final battle was about to begin. The throne room of the Volanthi Empire was the largest room Princess Yalara had ever known. It stretched for almost a full kilometer from one end to the other. The walls were made of living crystal that grew from the floor and reached up toward a ceiling so high that clouds sometimes formed there. Light from 3 distant suns came through the crystal and painted everything in shades of gold and purple and blue. Yalara stood beside her mother, Empress Thalindra, on the raised platform where the imperial throne sat. Her younger brother, Prince Kalen, stood on her other side. Below them, hundreds of nobles from across the empire filled the great hall. Their skin glowed with soft light in patterns of green and blue, the natural bioluminescence that marked the Volanthi. As one of the oldest and most advanced species in the galaxy, today was a special day. A delegation from a small species called humans had requested an audience with the Empress. They wanted to talk about something called a mutual defense agreement. The idea made Yulara want to laugh. She had studied humans during her education. They came from a small blue planet in a distant arm of the galaxy. They had only discovered how to travel between stars about 200 years ago. That was nothing. The Volanthi Empire had ruled this part of space for 40,000 years. 40,000 years of building, of conquering, of creating wonders that lesser species could not even understand. What could humans possibly offer to the Volanthi? The great doors at the far end of the throne room opened. A group of figures walked in, led by imperial guards whose armor shone like liquid silver. Behind the guards came the human delegation. Yulara watched them approach. They were so small. The tallest among them barely reached her shoulder. Their skin did not glow. They had no natural weapons, no claws or fangs or poison. They wore simple clothing made of fabric. Nothing like the elegant living garments that Volanthi nobles grew from their own bodies. The leader of the humans was a man who appeared to be middle-aged by their short standards. He had gray hair at his temples and lines on his face that showed he had lived maybe 50 or 60 of their years. His name, according to the briefing Yulara had read, was Daniel Carter. He was their ambassador to this sector of space. Behind him walked a younger woman with brown hair pulled back from her face. She carried a small device that Yulara recognized as a data tablet. Her name was Laura Bennett, and she was apparently some kind of scientist or researcher. The humans walked slowly across the enormous floor of the throne room. It took them several minutes to reach the proper distance from the throne, the place where all visitors were required to stop. The nobles watched them pass with expressions of amusement and mild curiosity. Some whispered to each other behind their hands. Daniel Carter stopped at the marked position and bowed deeply. It was a bow of respect, Yulara admitted to herself. The human knew the proper forms. But knowing forms did not make him worthy of standing in this chamber. "Your Imperial Majesty," Daniel said. His voice was calm and clear. It carried well in the vast space, though it lacked the natural resonance that Volanthi voices possessed. "I bring greetings from the United Earth Coalition. We are honored by this audience." Empress Thalindra did not respond. She sat perfectly still on her throne, her ancient eyes watching the human with an expression that Yulara could not read. Her mother was over 900 years old, ancient even by Volanthi standards. She had seen empires rise and fall. She rarely showed what she was thinking. Daniel Carter continued, "We come with a proposal for your consideration. As you know, a threat approaches this sector. The species known as the Harvester Swarm has destroyed 17 civilizations in the past 300 years. They consume everything in their path. Planets, ships, people. Nothing survives their advance." Yulara already knew about the swarm. Everyone in the Empire knew about the swarm. They were a distant problem, still many years away from Volanthi space. The military was preparing defenses. There was no need for concern. "We propose a mutual defense agreement," Daniel said. "An alliance between our peoples. We have developed new weapons and strategies that we believe can stop the swarm. We offer to share these with you and to fight alongside your forces when the time comes." Yulara could not contain herself any longer. The laughter escaped from her throat before she could stop it. It was a beautiful sound, like crystal bells ringing, but it was filled with mockery. the entire throne room fell silent. Every noble, every guard, every servant stopped and stared at the princess. Laughing at a diplomatic delegation was not proper behavior. But Yalara did not care. The idea was simply too funny. "You wish to defend us?" she said, stepping forward on the platform. Her scales caught the light and shimmered with colors the humans could not even see. "You wish to offer us protection?" Daniel Carter's expression did not change. He looked at her with calm, patient eyes. "We wish to fight alongside you, Your Highness." "As allies. Allies." Yalara said the word as if it tasted bad. "Your species has existed in space for barely 200 years. You have perhaps 1,000 ships in your entire fleet. You still fight wars among yourselves on your own homeworld. You cannot even agree on a single government for a single planet. And you wish to be our allies against the swarm?" She gestured at the throne room around them, at the crystal walls and the glowing nobles and the guards in their silver armor. "The Volanthi Empire has ruled this sector for 40,000 years. We have 10,000 warships. We have weapons that can crack planets and shields that can stop stars. We have technology that your scientists cannot even begin to understand." She paused, enjoying the moment. "What could you possibly offer us?" The nobles in the hall began to laugh as well. The sound filled the vast space like music, like a song of mockery directed at the small creatures standing on the floor below. Daniel Carter waited for the laughter to fade. Then he spoke again, and his voice was still calm. "We offer experience, Your Highness." "Experience?" Yalara almost choked on another laugh. "Experience in what? Surviving on one small planet? Fighting each other with primitive weapons? Dying from diseases that we eliminated millions of years ago?" She turned to her brother, who was grinning beside her. "The humans offer us experience." "How generous of them." Kalen nodded. "Perhaps they can teach us how to pollute our own atmosphere. I hear they nearly destroyed their homeworld doing that." More laughter from the nobles. More amusement at the expense of the small, fragile creatures who had dared to offer help to the mighty Volanthi Empire. But through it all, Daniel Carter did not react. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. And behind the calm surface of his eyes, something stirred. Something old and patient and surprisingly fierce. Laura Bennett stood behind him, her jaw tight with controlled anger. But she too remained silent. They were diplomats. They had trained for moments like this. On her throne, Empress Thalindra finally moved. She raised one hand, and the laughter stopped instantly. Every sound in the throne room died. The silence was so complete that Yalara could hear her own heart beating. "You spoke of experience," the Empress said. Her voice was soft but carried perfectly to every corner of the vast chamber. "What experience do humans have that you believe would be valuable to us?" Daniel Carter bowed again. "Your Majesty, I would prefer to discuss that matter in private. There are details that are not suitable for a public audience." Yalara snorted. "There is nothing you could say that would require privacy. You have nothing of value to share with us." But her mother raised that hand again, and Yalara fell silent. "Granted," the Empress said. The single word fell like a stone into still water. "You will have your private audience, Ambassador, and my daughter will attend." Yalara stared at her mother in shock. A private audience? For humans? It was unheard of. The Empress had not granted a private audience to any outsider in 300 years. "Mother," she began, "surely this is not necessary. These creatures have nothing to offer us. They are wasting our time." The Empress rose from her throne. She was tall, even for a Volanthi, and when she stood, she seemed to fill the entire chamber with her presence. "You will attend," she repeated, "and you will learn that the universe contains more history than is recorded in our archives." She looked at Daniel Carter, and for just a moment, something passed between them. Some recognition that Yalara could not understand. "Come," the Empress said. "Let us discuss the true history of our peoples." The private chamber of the Empress was nothing like the throne room. There were no crystal walls here, no vast spaces, no crowds of nobles watching and judging. This room was small and simple. The walls were made of dark stone, and the only light came from soft panels set into the ceiling. Yalara had never been in this room before. She had not even known it existed. She looked around with confusion, trying to understand why her mother would have such a plain space hidden away from the rest of the palace. The Empress sat in a simple chair near the center of the room. Daniel Carter and Laura Bennett stood before her, their faces calm and patient. The guards had been left outside. Only the four of them remained. "Speak," the Empress commanded. Daniel Carter reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, no larger than his palm. "With your permission, I would like to show you some images." The Empress nodded. The device activated, and suddenly the room was filled with light. Holographic images appeared in the air, floating between them like ghosts made of colored light. And what Yalara saw made her blood run cold. It was her homeworld, Volanthi Prime, but not as she knew it. In the images, the great cities were burning. Ships filled the sky, dark and terrible, shaped like nothing she had ever seen. And on the ground, among the flames and the smoke, creatures moved. They were harvesting the population, gathering them up like farmers gathering grain. "The swarm," Yalara whispered. "The first swarm," Daniel Carter said. "What you face now is not new, Your Highness. They came before 40,000 years ago. This is what your world looked like when they arrived." Yalara shook her head. "Impossible. Our records show that there was a minor invasion in the early years of the Empire. A small force that our ancestors drove back. There is no mention of the swarm." "Your records were changed," the Empress said quietly. Yalara turned to stare at her mother. "What?" "The records were changed by my grandmother's grandmother. She ordered all true accounts of the invasion destroyed. She believed that the truth would make our people weak, that they would feel shame and fear instead of pride." "But what is the truth?" Yalara demanded. "What really happened?" Daniel Carter changed the holographic display. Now they saw space filled with stars, and moving among the stars, a fleet of ships. They were small ships, primitive compared to Volanthi designs. Their hulls were made of simple metal. Their weapons looked like toys next to Volanthi technology. But there were thousands of them, more than Yalara could count. "The Terran Intervention Fleet," Daniel said. 2,000 ships, carrying the combined military forces of Earth. They had been watching the swarm for 50 years, studying them, learning their weaknesses. When they saw your world burning, they came to help. "Humans saved us?" Yalara could not believe what she was hearing. "That is impossible. Humans are weak. Humans are primitive. Humans could not possibly defeat the swarm." But the images kept changing, showing her things she could not deny. She saw human ships flying directly into battle against the swarm. She saw them die by the hundreds, consumed by harvester units or destroyed by weapons fire. But she also saw them fighting back. She saw swarm ships exploding. She saw the great cluster beginning to break apart. "How?" she asked. "How did they do it?" Laura Bennett stepped forward. "The swarm operates on a connected network, Your Highness. All of their units are linked together through a special kind of communication. They share information instantly across vast distances. This is what makes them so dangerous. They can coordinate perfectly." She pulled up more images, showing complex diagrams and data streams. "But our ancestors discovered that certain frequencies could disrupt this communication. We spent decades developing weapons that could use this weakness. When we attacked the swarm at your homeworld, We used these weapons to break their connection. Yalara watched the battle unfold before her eyes. Human ships, tiny and fragile, diving into the heart of the swarm. Human soldiers, soft and mortal, fighting hand-to-hand against harvester units. She saw explosions and death and terrible destruction. But she also saw courage. She saw humans dying to save her ancestors. 47,000 human soldiers died in the battle for Volanthi Prime, Daniel Carter said. His voice was soft now, filled with old grief. Another 12,000 died in the follow-up campaign to drive the swarm from your system completely. The war lasted 18 months. Yalara felt her legs grow weak. She wanted to sit down, but there was no chair near her. She simply stood there, staring at the images of human sacrifice. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? We had never met before. We were nothing to you. We were strangers on the other side of the galaxy. Daniel Carter looked at her with those calm, patient eyes. And now Yalara saw something in them that she had missed before. It was not weakness, as she had thought. It was the opposite of weakness. It was the kind of strength that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you believed. Because you were people who needed help, he said simply. And we were people who could provide it. The room fell silent. Yalara looked at her mother, hoping to find some denial, some explanation that would make all of this untrue. But the Empress only nodded slowly, confirming everything the human had said. The founding Empress was my ancestor, Talindra said. She ordered the records changed because she was ashamed. She could not accept that her people had been saved by outsiders. She wanted to build an empire of strength and pride, not one built on gratitude to another species. But we owed them everything, Yalara said. Our entire civilization, our entire history since then, has been possible because of what they did. Yes, the Empress agreed. We owed them everything. And we repaid them with silence and lies and forgotten history. Daniel Carter raised his hand. We did not come here to demand payment or recognition. We came because the swarm is returning, and we need allies to stop them. He changed the holographic display again. Now it showed a star map of the sector, with a dark mass moving slowly toward the center. The swarm has been growing for the past 40,000 years, he explained. They consumed 17 civilizations, absorbing their populations and their resources. They are much stronger now than they were when we first defeated them. And they remember. Remember what? Yalara asked. They remember that this was the place where they were stopped. This was the place where they suffered their only defeat. They are coming back to finish what they started. Laura Bennett pulled up more data. The frequencies we used before will not work this time. The swarm has adapted. We have developed new countermeasures, but we do not have enough ships to use them across the entire sector. We need partners. We need species with large fleets and advanced technology. You need us, Yalara realized. We need each other, Daniel corrected. Alone, neither of our peoples can stop the swarm, but together, combining our technology and our numbers and our experience, we have a chance. Yalara turned away from them. She walked to the wall of the small chamber and pressed her hand against the cold stone. Her mind was spinning with everything she had learned. Everything she had believed about her people, about humans, about the history of the galaxy, was wrong. She had laughed at them. In the throne room, in front of hundreds of nobles, she had laughed at the descendants of the people who had died to save her ancestors. She had mocked their offer of help. She had called them primitive and weak. I spoke without knowledge, she said finally, without turning around. I dishonored the memory of those who gave their lives for my people. Daniel Carter walked closer to her. You spoke as you were taught, Your Highness. The dishonor belongs to those who changed the records and taught you false history. Not to you, but now I know the truth. Yalara turned to face him. And that changes everything. She looked at her mother, the ancient empress who had kept this secret for so long. How long have you known? She asked. I discovered the truth about a century ago, Talindra replied. I found old records that had escaped destruction. At first, I did not believe them. But I searched and eventually I found proof. And you kept it secret? I was not sure what to do with the knowledge. I knew it would destroy much of what our people believed about themselves. I was afraid of what that might do to us. Daniel Carter spoke again. Your mother built something, Your Highness. Something we discovered during our research. She built a memorial to the human soldiers who died saving your world. It orbits a moon at the edge of your system, hidden from view. Yalara looked at her mother with new eyes. I had to honor them somehow, Talindra said. Even if no one else knew the truth, I knew. And I could not let their sacrifice be completely forgotten. Yalara felt something warm and painful growing in her chest. It was shame, deep and powerful. But it was also something else. It was determination. Then we will honor them properly, she said. Not in secret, but openly. And we will prove ourselves worthy of their sacrifice by fighting alongside their descendants. She looked at Daniel Carter. I will lead our fleet myself. I will fight beside you, as your ancestors fought beside mine. And this time, the swarm will not survive. The Alliance fleet gathered in a region of space called the Graviton Reaches. It was a strange place, where the normal rules of physics bent and twisted in unusual ways. Stars looked different here. Light moved along curved paths. And most importantly, the special communication network that the swarm used would not work properly in this place. Yalara stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance, the flagship of the Volanthi Imperial Navy. It was the largest ship she had ever commanded. Over 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons and shields that could withstand the heart of a star. Around her, officers worked at their stations, preparing for the battle that was about to begin. Through the viewing screens, she could see the rest of the Alliance fleet. 3,000 ships from 12 different species, all gathered together for the first time in galactic history. Volanthi warships with their crystal hulls and glowing weapons. Human vessels with their practical designs and powerful engines. Kovathi living ships that looked like enormous sea creatures. Sistery energy craft that seemed to be made entirely of contained lightning dot, and beyond them, at the edge of the sensor range. The swarm was approaching. 53,000 individual units, the tactical officer reported. His voice was calm, but Yalara could see the fear in his eyes. They will reach our position in approximately 4 hours. 53,000. Against their 3,000. The numbers were not good. But Yalara had learned from the humans that numbers were not everything. She opened the communication channel to the entire fleet. Soldiers of the Alliance, she began. Today, we face an enemy that has destroyed 17 civilizations. They believe they cannot be stopped. They believe they will consume us as they have consumed so many others. She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew. They were scared. They had every right to be scared. 40,000 years ago, my ancestors faced this same enemy. They were alone and unprepared. They were being harvested, taken from their homes and families. They had no hope. On the viewing screen, she saw human ships moving into formation beside Volanthi vessels. She saw Kovathi and Sistery and Mendari and all the others taking their positions. But they were not alone. Humans came from across the galaxy to help them. They fought and bled and died for people they had never met. They asked for nothing in return. They simply saw suffering and could not look away. She felt her voice growing stronger. Today, we fight to honor their sacrifice. Today, we prove that their trust was not misplaced. Today, we show the swarm that the galaxy is not theirs to consume. We stand together, different species united by a common purpose. And together, we will not be defeated. Across the fleet, soldiers of a dozen species heard her words. On the human flagship USS Resolution, Admiral Gregory Palmer nodded slowly. His grandfather had served in the first intervention fleet. He had grown up on stories of that ancient battle. Now it was his turn to continue the legacy. On the Kovathi-living ship Heartwood, Captain Valessa felt her vessel pulse with shared determination. Her ship was alive, connected to her thoughts and feelings. It knew they were about to face death, and it was not afraid. On the Mendari cruiser Whispered Dream, the telepathic crew members reached out with their minds, connecting with every ship in the fleet. They would provide instant communication during the battle, allowing the Alliance to coordinate perfectly despite the chaos of combat. The hours passed slowly. Yara used the time to review battle plans with her officers, to check weapon systems, to make sure everything was ready. She ate a small meal, though she barely tasted it. She wrote a message to her mother, telling her that she loved her and that she was proud to be her daughter. Then the swarm arrived. They came like a dark cloud, blocking out the stars. 53,000 units moving in perfect coordination, their quantum network linking them together into a single vast organism. They had consumed entire civilizations. They had never been defeated, not truly. The humans had hurt them once, long ago, but they had survived and grown stronger. They would not be hurt again. All ships, activate countermeasures, Yolara commanded. Across the fleet, weapon systems powered up. The new countermeasures developed by human scientists over decades of research began broadcasting carefully designed signals into space. These signals would disrupt the swarm's communication network, forcing them to fight as individuals rather than as one mind. But the swarm had adapted. They did not fragment completely as they had in the First War. Instead, they split into smaller groups, each one still coordinated, still deadly. Countermeasures are partially effective, the tactical officer reported. The swarm is broken into approximately 200 subclusters. Each cluster still contains several hundred units. It will have to be enough, Yolara said. All ships, engage. The battle began with a roar of energy and fire. Alliance ships launched waves of missiles and energy beams. Swarm units swarmed forward, their harvester appendages ready to consume anything they touched. The two forces crashed together in a storm of destruction. Within minutes, ships were dying on both sides. Yolara watched as a Volanti cruiser was overwhelmed by harvester units, its hull breached, its crew taken. She saw a human destroyer ram directly into a swarm command node, destroying it at the cost of every life aboard. "Press forward," she ordered. "We must reach their central cluster." The Eternal Vigilance pushed deeper into the swarm formation. Its shields flared with each impact, its weapons firing constantly in all directions. Around it, the rest of the fleet followed, fighting for every kilometer of space. The Kovathi ships proved invaluable. When they were damaged, they healed themselves, regenerating hull breaches and weapon systems in minutes. They could take hits that would destroy any other vessel and keep fighting. The Sisteri energy craft cut through swarm units like knives through water. Their weapons could bypass any shield, any armor. Where they passed, they left trails of destruction. The Mendari maintained constant telepathic contact between all Alliance ships. Commands were given and received instantly. When one captain saw an opportunity, every other captain knew about it at the same moment, but still the swarm kept coming. For every unit destroyed, 10 more took its place. For every kilometer gained, a price was paid in blood and fire. Admiral Palmer on the USS Resolution coordinated the human forces with grim determination. He had known from the beginning that this would be a costly battle. He had accepted that many of his people would die, but he had also known that there was no other choice. All human ships, Execute Maneuver Delta 7, he ordered. The human fleet, smaller and less powerful than the Volanthi forces, but more maneuverable, broke into small groups and began targeting swarm communication nodes. These were the units that kept the subclusters coordinated. Destroy them, and the clusters would fragment even further. It worked, but at terrible cost. Ship after ship was lost as they made their attack runs. Crews who knew they would not survive flew their vessels directly into the heart of enemy formations, detonating their weapons at point-blank range. Yalara watched the human sacrifice with tears in her eyes. They were dying the same way their ancestors had died 40,000 years ago, giving everything for people they barely knew. We will not waste their sacrifice, she swore. All Volanthi ships follow me. She drove the Eternal Vigilance forward, leading the charge toward the center of the swarm formation. Behind her, the entire Volanthi fleet followed. They crashed through swarm resistance like a spear through flesh, taking damage but never stopping. And then, at the moment when victory seemed possible, disaster struck. A new swarm cluster emerged from fold space directly behind the Alliance fleet. 10,000 fresh units, unaffected by the countermeasures, perfectly coordinated. They fell upon the rear of the Alliance formation like wolves on sheep. Reinforce the rear lines, Yalara ordered, but she knew it was too late. They were trapped between two forces, caught in a crossfire that would destroy them. The battle had turned against them. And then the Mindari captain on the Whispered Dream shouted something into them. Communication network. New contacts emerging from fold space. Identify as Mindari Confederation 3rd Fleet. Yalara looked at the tactical display in disbelief. 300 ships, bearing the markings of the Mindari, appeared directly behind the new swarm cluster. They had come without warning, without announcement. We felt your determination, the Mindari fleet commander broadcast. His voice echoed with telepathic resonance. We felt your willingness to die for each other. We had to join you. The Mindari reinforcements struck the new swarm cluster from behind. Their telepathic coordination allowed them to fight as a single organism, anticipating swarm movements before they happened. The tide of battle began to turn. The arrival of the Mindari fleet changed everything. The swarm, caught between two forces, began to fragment. Their coordination broke down as their communication nodes were destroyed one by one. Subclusters that had been fighting as unified groups dissolved into chaos. Yalara pushed the Eternal Vigilance forward with renewed energy. The path to the central swarm cluster was finally open. If they could destroy the primary hive ship, the one that contained the swarm's central intelligence, the entire horde would collapse. All ships capable of continuing, follow my lead, she broadcast. We end this now. The Alliance fleet, battered and bleeding but still fighting, surged forward. Volanthi and human ships flew side by side. Kovathi vessels, their living hulls scarred but still healing, pushed through the debris of destroyed enemies. Sistery craft cut pathways through the remaining resistance. The primary hive ship was enormous. It was larger than any vessel Yalar had ever seen, a massive organic structure that pulsed with dark energy. Inside it, the collective consciousness of the swarm directed the movements of every surviving unit. Destroy it, and the swarm would cease to exist as a coordinated force. But the hive ship was not undefended. Thousands of harvester units surrounded it, ready to consume anyone who came close. And the hive ship itself had weapons, vast energy projectors that could destroy entire fleets. We cannot break through with ships alone, Admiral Palmer reported. His voice was tired but determined. We need a boarding action. Soldiers on the inside, destroying the core directly. Yalara made her decision without hesitation. I will lead the boarding party, she announced. Your Highness. That is too dangerous, her first officer protested. You are the princess of the Empire. You cannot risk yourself in close combat. I am not risking myself as a princess, Yalara replied. I am fighting as a soldier of the Alliance, as my ancestors should have fought 40,000 years ago. She left the bridge and made her way to the boarding shuttle bay. Already, soldiers were gathering there. Velanthi warriors in their gleaming armor, ready to fight with blade and energy weapon. And beside them, human marines in their practical combat suits, checking their rifles and grenades. A human officer approached her. His name was Jack Morrison, and he led the Marine detachment assigned to the Eternal Vigilance. We are honored to fight beside you, Your Highness, he said, saluting. Just Yalara, she replied. Today, there are no ranks, only soldiers. The boarding shuttles launched into the chaos of battle. Swarm units tried to intercept them, but Alliance fighters flew escort, sacrificing themselves to protect the transports. One by one, the shuttles made it through to the hive ship and crashed. Through its organic hull, Yalara was the first one out of her shuttle. She landed in a corridor of living tissue, walls that pulsed and breathed around her. The air was thick and wrong, filled with chemicals that burned her lungs. She activated the filter in her helmet and pushed forward. Human marines fanned out around her, their weapons ready. Velanthi warriors took positions on her flanks. Together, they began the long fight toward the core. The inside of the hive ship was a nightmare. Harvester units attacked from every direction, emerging from the walls and floors and ceiling. The soldiers fought them back with blade and bullet and energy beam, but for every unit they destroyed, more appeared. Jack Morrison fought beside Yalara, his rifle firing in controlled bursts. He moved with the precision of someone who had trained for this moment his entire life. The core should be about 2 kilometers ahead, he reported. According to our scans, it is in the central chamber. Then, we keep moving, Yalara said. They pushed forward, leaving their dead behind them. Velanthi and human soldiers died together, their blood mixing on the organic floor of the alien ship. But the survivors kept fighting, kept advancing, refusing to stop. The resistance grew fiercer as they approached the core. The swarm knew they were coming. It threw everything it had at them, trying to stop the invaders before they could reach the heart of its consciousness. Yalara fought harder than she had ever fought before. Her blade cut through harvester units in wide arcs. Her energy pistol burned holes through organic armor. She took wounds, cuts and burns that would have stopped a lesser warrior. But she kept moving. Finally, they reached the central chamber. It was vast. A cathedral-sized space filled with pulsing organic matter. And at the center, connected to everything by thousands of tendrils and cables, was the core. It was a mass of neural tissue, glowing with the combined consciousness of the entire swarm. When Yalara looked at it, she felt its attention turn toward her. She felt its ancient hunger, its desire to consume everything in the galaxy. Destroy it, she commanded. The surviving soldiers attacked. Grenades and energy weapons struck the core, tearing chunks from its surface. But it was enormous, and it was fighting back. Waves of psychic energy swept through the chamber, dropping soldiers to their knees with pain. Yalara pushed through the agony. She walked toward the core, step by step, while her soldiers provided covering fire. She drew her ceremonial blade, the one that had been passed down through generations of Velanthi royalty. For Stephen Moore, she whispered, and all who came before. She plunged the blade into the core. The effect was immediate. The core screamed, a sound that existed more in the mind than in the ears. Across the hive ship, across the entire swarm, units stopped moving. The coordination that had made them unstoppable was gone. The collective consciousness that had driven them to consume everything was dying. Yalara twisted her blade, driving it deeper. The core pulsed and spasmed around her weapon. Its tendrils flailed wildly, striking the walls and floor. Its glow began to fade. Then it was still. The swarm was dead. The return journey was easier than the assault. With the core destroyed, the harvester units had collapsed into mindless husks. The boarding parties made their way back to the shuttles and returned to their ships. Yalara stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance as the last of the swarm died. She watched a great cluster break apart, millions of tons of organic matter drifting dead in space. She saw the stars reappear as the darkness faded. The Alliance had won. The cost had been terrible. Nearly half of the Alliance fleet had been destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from a dozen species had given their lives. The graviton reaches were filled with wreckage and debris and the bodies of the fallen, but the swarm was gone. Not just driven back, but truly destroyed. They would never consume another civilization. They would never harvest another world. In the days that followed, the surviving fleet gathered at the secret memorial Empress Thalindra had built. The structure that had once hidden in shame was now the center of a celebration. Yalara stood before the memorial, surrounded by representatives of every species in the Alliance. Behind her, the names of the original human soldiers gleamed in the light of distant stars. This memorial was built to honor those who came from across the stars to save us, she said. Her voice broadcast across the sector. Today, we add new names to its surface. The names of every soldier who gave their lives in this battle, regardless of species. Workers began carving new names into the memorial. Human names beside Volanti, names beside Corvati and Sisteri and Mendari names. All of them together, equal in sacrifice. But more than names, we make a promise, Ilara continued. The alliance we forged in war will not end with peace. We will remember the lesson the humans taught us 40,000 years ago. The lesson they taught us again today. She looked at Daniel Carter, who stood in the front row of the gathered representatives. We are stronger together. We fight better together. When darkness comes, in whatever form it takes, we will face it together. Daniel Carter stepped forward and placed his hand on the memorial surface. The legacy of those who came before is not just their sacrifice, he said. It is the future they made possible. Every child born in this sector, every dream pursued, every moment of peace and joy. That is their true legacy. And now that legacy belongs to all of us. The representatives of 12 species bowed their heads together. In that moment, they were not Volanti or human or Corvathi or Mandari. They were something new, something that had never existed before. They were the Alliance. In the years that followed, the Alliance grew and strengthened. New species joined. New agreements were made. The sector that had once been marked for consumption became the most peaceful and prosperous region in the galaxy. And at the center of it all was the memorial. It grew larger with each passing year, as new names were added and new stories were told. People came from across the galaxy to see it, to read the names, to understand the sacrifice that had made their freedom possible. Yalara visited often. She would stand before the memorial and read the names of those she had known, those she had fought beside, those she had lost. And she would always pause at one particular name. Carved into the oldest section of the structure. Stephen Moore, Ohio, Earth. A high, 19-year-old boy who had crossed the stars to die for strangers. Thank you, she would whisper. We will not forget. The princess, who had once laughed at humans, now led an alliance that honored their memory. The debt had been repaid, not in treasure or territory, but in something more valuable. In the willingness to stand together against the darkness, forever. The end.